We need to keep those folks in mind. But that's true a stone's throw from this building. That's true right where we are. And I hope that this will encourage you not only by what God is accomplishing through you over there, but will also motivate you and encourage you to do what you're already doing here. What a beautiful, incredibly beautiful fellowship this congregation has. What biblical maturity you have. The ladies are models of service and humility. The men are standing up and doing their job as husbands and fathers and grandfathers. The church is meeting and praising God. It's just as it ought to be. And He's done that for you so you can do it for others. For those who don't know. So when Jesus gave the Great Commission, go and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved, and he who doesn't believe shall be condemned. And he said in Matthew chapter 28, the Great Commission again, go. Make disciples of every nation, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach them to observe all the things that I have commanded you, and know that I am with you always, even to the ends of the earth. If you walked in these doors today and said, Dwayne, sit down, I have something to say to my church. And you say, brethren, let's go. Let's go. Who in your community is hurting? Who in your community is hopeless? Who in your community is helpless? Who in your community is lost? He'd say, he wouldn't say, you go. He'd say, let's go. Because I promised, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. I have some slides to show, and I was going to give a devotional talk first and then do the slides, but I think I'll do the slides first and then follow up with the devotional, because I want you to see some people that have been reached through your help for us. I want you to see it to start with. And we got this thing working. I think. Even that's a minor miracle. Usually when I touch these things, it's a kiss of death. Look at that.
Look at that.
Indonesia, world's largest, most populous Muslim nation, by far. By far. The majority of the world's Muslims don't live in Southeast Asia or in the Middle East. In the Middle East, no. They're in other parts of the world, Africa, Indonesia, India, Malaysia. They're more Christian, they're more Muslims in those countries than all of the rest of the Middle Eastern countries put together. But this is also the most receptive Muslim country on the face of the earth. You're helping us stay in a place where we get to reach out to folks who are receptive and willing to hear, with no government restrictions. I get my visa. We plant churches. We report. We receive recognition. We publish and distribute literature. We preach over the radio in the world's largest, most populous Muslim nation, the fourth most populous nation in the world. When I first got there in 1985, and I've told you this here before, that is in Indonesia, after I'd already been a missionary in Papua New Guinea before. When I arrived in 1985 alone in Papua, West Papua, which is part of Indonesia, western half of the island of New Guinea, I went to a place that had been pointed out to me where there were no churches. Never had been any churches. I was pointed in that direction by a man who was the head of the Christian Protestant section of the Department of Religion. He said, Mr. Morgan, you cannot get your visa to go where churches already exist. He said, you can go where there are no churches. I felt like Paul. I've said this before too. I can imagine somebody saying, Paul, you can preach as long as you'll go where nobody else has preached the gospel. I felt like saying, well, don't throw us into that briar patch. But this is what's happened. It's what happened there by government rule, by regulation. And I said, okay, where? And that man gave me some instruction. He said, go there, because others had tried to go there and failed. The place he pointed out to me was tough, one of the toughest places you could go, and there were no churches in that interior to which he sent me. But we went. When I first got there in 1985, the first day I was in the Indonesian half of New Guinea, alone, nobody met me at the airport. I walked early in one morning. I walked through this town of Sentani where the airport was. I walked out and walked up the side of a hill, and I came to a military base. And I told this story here before, but say one of the great things about my being older, maybe some of you too being a little older, you don't remember anything. So I'll just tell it all over again. And I came up there, and there's a sign right beside the gate going into that military base. And I know why it's there. So when these bus loads of new recruits are coming in for basic training, the bus stops right there, and this drill sergeant says, "Look at that sign, boys." And it says, "Kalau takut di sini, lebih baik pulang." That's in Indonesian. "Kalau takut di sini, lebih baik pulang." In English, if you're afraid here, it's best you turn back. And I remember standing on that spot the first full day I was in Indonesia, New Guinea in 1985, and reading that and dropped my head and prayed. I took it as a message from God. Prepared well in advance, but I know He prepared it just for me. And I prayed, "Lord, by your grace, if you will it, I am not going to turn back." Well, that's 31 years ago. And so that's kind of the background of some of the things you're going to look at in these pictures just the next few minutes. So this is where I was sent. I've told you about the Demisa tribe. Cannibals at that time, unevangelized, no church among them, never had been. Unevangelized area, no roads, no airstrips. People living still as their ancestors did centuries ago. Subsistence farmers, hunters and gatherers, engaged in endemic tribal warfare, suffering from tropical diseases. 50% of their babies die at birth at that time. And 50% of those who survive will die before they reach the age of 3. So only a minority of those kids survive. And that's where they sent us. That's where they sent me. That's where I was more than ready and willing to go. From the tribes to the cities. This is the Sayodate tribe, and some more of the Demisas, and a younger guy, me. I've aged a lot in these last few years. I don't know what's happening. But that's where it started. And it's hard. It's hard. There are reasons the uncontacted tribes are uncontacted. They're geographically distant. The geographical challenges are daunting. I mean, you're having to swim crocodile-infested rivers, really, believe me. If you don't believe me, I'm sorry, but it's true. You have to climb mountains where there are no roads, no GPS. You know, you're going into the interior and you don't know what you're going to find. But there was a reason for that. I told you, I reported to you. Before I went over there, I did what you were talking about this morning too, Brother Lakey. There's that patience and the urgency. I spent 13 months before I went to Indonesia studying about Indonesian government's plans for developing the frontier in this huge California-sized province that was so sparsely populated, has 20% of the landmass of all of Indonesia and 2% of the population. So I knew the government's going here. Eventually, I went into the planning offices and I asked them, and they showed me maps, and I saw where the roads were going to be built and the airstrips, and where they were going to bring in settlers from overcrowded islands on the other parts of Indonesia. Java, an island the size of the state of New York with 137 million people, 50% under the age of 20. Guess where they're moving them? Here. And so we said, yes, send us to the remote tribes. We're happy to go there. That mostly unpopulated area from sea level to about 1,000 meters in elevation, where the Indonesian government is moving them in droves. So that was just in prospect back then. Now, right there with the Demisa tribe, the middle picture on the left-hand side, now is a capital city of a brand new sub-district. A capital city that has an elementary school, a middle school, a high school, government offices, a hospital. When I went there, it was 40 houses on the muddy banks of a remote river, grass-thatched huts and people with bones to their noses. And God is letting the church grow, the city grow around the church. It's right on the brand new Trans-Papua Highway. And the Demisa tribe, who already were the owners of the property, have been given permission by the Indonesian government to have 10 acres of land, 10 hectares, that's really 22 acres of land, right on that Trans-Papua Highway for whatever they want to use it for. So I said in the beginning, you can't read this, but there's a 3-legged stool. We wanted to find as many people as possible willing to be taught. We wanted to prepare the very best Bible teaching materials possible in great quantity in the Indonesian language, and we wanted to train, equip, and motivate Indonesians to do that very same thing. We wanted everything we do to be replicable. We wanted it to be their ministry. So I didn't go in there flashing money. I didn't go in there paying people for their own property to build them a building that they're going to... No. Every congregation in Irian Jaya, in West New Guinea, that has been established, has built their own church building from the ground up. In Sarua, you'll see some pictures. It took them 7 years, but they did it. And it's their building, and it's their ministry. And so all of that now is in place. I got to report to you. This was the plan that I developed during those 13 months of research before I went there. This is 31 years later, how it has been implemented. I wasn't going on with a preconceived idea about how to do it. That's why when I presented this to missions committees and elderships in the beginning, they said, Dwayne, that's not a plan. How are you going to do it? My answer, I don't know. I've never been there. I'm going to learn. But I know these principles are sound. These are biblical principles. Find as many as people as possible. You know, Jesus appeared to Paul in Corinth in Acts chapter 18 and said, don't be afraid. Keep on speaking. Nobody's going to harm you. I have many people in this city. He didn't say how many. Paul didn't know how many, but Jesus knew exactly how many. And so Paul wrote later, after the church had been planted in Corinth, he writes a letter to him in chapter 9. He says, I came here to save as many as possible. Become all things to all men, that by all means might save some, as many as possible, says verse 21. That was our plan. Well, now you're going to see how it's being implemented, how churches have been planted, and how they're being equipped and motivated to perpetuate that ministry. It's not dependent upon American support. But they keep asking me to come back because I'm the grandpa, and that's okay. As long as I live, I'll keep going back. This is that church building. The church is really built with their own hands over a period of 7 years. 12 years after the congregation was established. The first 5 years we worshiped in a native materials building that they built out of just twigs and grass and rattan and a grass roof. But they built that building over a period of 7 years themselves. This congregational by extension, you can't read that, I know, I should have printed it out, but we have several principles. We want it to be intensive, and that means we want people to come together. I want congregational teaching by extension. I want to go into where all these congregations have been established and equip them to minister right where they are, to live the Christian life, first of all, but also to minister and fulfill the Great Commission right where they are. But it's intensive. We get into the Bible. We study it. But we want it to be interactive. When they come, it's not just me speaking. And I'll show some pictures. They come together and we change ideas and they come up with a plan. That's always been the objective. And we want it to be intentional. We want it to be intentional. When we have these seminars that you're going to see pictures of here, we don't want anybody going home saying, well, what do we do now? That stage is long past. We want to get together and say, what do we do now? Let's do it. And let's agree. And there have been some incredible developments in the work. So we get together, we read the Bible, we discuss it, they come to a conclusion, they summarize what we're talking about, and they say, here's what we need to do. This is even some of these congregations that were pre-literate villagers before I went, could not read or write. Well, 30 years later, some of their children have graduated from university. I'll show you some more incredible developments that have happened since then. So this is the stuff, this is written stuff, but we want it to be interactive. And so we do it with them at their level, at their place. Now these little kids, they look just like, okay, where's that point? Oh, there it is. Oh, I have to hold it down. This technology is driving me crazy. Look at these little kids. This is at Sentosa. I met with you before and I told you at Sentosa in 1990, I went there because one of our brethren went there into that area among the Oria tribe hunting for crocodiles. He came into contact with the Oria tribe that had been off limits since 1968 because a government contingent had gone in there and had been immediately killed, slaughtered on the spot. And so from 1968 until 1989, late 1989, no missionaries, no churches, nobody could go in there. And this brother wanders in there and got lost hunting for crocodiles, and the Oria tribe meets up with him and takes him to the village of Uli. And they took him in and they spent time with him. They fed him and he spent some time. And finally he brought the village headman down to my place in Santani, down near the coast. And the man told me, and Phyllis met him just a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, Isaac Saspe. And he said to me on that day, that first day when he came to my place with Daud Pocoro, the man who was hunting the crocodiles, if you'll come teach us, we promise not to kill you. That was before they heard me teach. But they've kept their promise anyhow. And so this is there. This is Santani. This is Sentosa. Sentosa with the Oria tribe today.